If everything's getting better, then why does it feel like everything is about to fall apart? We're told we're living at the peak of human history. Longer lives, less violence, more comfort, more progress. And on paper, this all seems true. But in real life, it just feels like something isn't adding up. Beneath the surface of all this progress and all these improvements, there's just this persistent feeling that something is not right, or that something's missing, or like slipping away. Part of what's happening is that we are living inside a story. It's part of human nature that we live inside these stories or worldviews, a set of assumptions or givens that we don't really question because we're not actually fully aware that we're living in this story. In our modern case, it's a particularly powerful story with world reaching implications. It's the story of progress. I first heard about it in Thomas Berry's beautiful book, The Dream of the Earth, and I was like, I need to find out more about this. So in this video, I am going to share with you what I found. The myth of progress is a story that we are living that says humanity is progressing, that we are the most advanced, most intelligent, most evolved humans that ever were. It's a story that history is unfolding along a straight line or a ladder, a hierarchy, and that better, better, better is unquestionable, inevitable even. This myth of progress didn't just appear, it has foundational ideas, and the roots of the progress myth are kind of uncomfortable. The story starts in the 19th century. Well, I'm going to start the story here, but its seeds were probably in the Axial Age and the fertile ground was probably the Enlightenment. But around this time in the 19th century is a time called New Imperialism, which is like an explosion of colonialism marked by the Industrial Revolution. Progress, right? And factories needed raw materials, they needed workers, they needed new markets and new places to invest. And there's also this competitive arena across Europe and including the United States where there was this like race to expand. So there's the Industrial Revolution and this invigorated colonial expansion, but there's also this strange cultural moral justification. Because at the same time, you have Darwin's new theory of evolution, which in biology just means adaptation over time. But because of the milieu that this idea is born in, it starts to take on some interesting social interpretations. A hierarchy, right? You've seen the pictures. At the bottom, you've got the animals, like chimpanzee, then you have so-called primitive humans, and then like more indigenous cultures. And at the top, you have European industrial society, right? Civilized, rational humans are the pinnacle of humankind. So you have this line or hierarchy, right? Where some cultures are ahead and other cultures are behind. And you get this like moral implication where you could help advance others. You feel like you're participating in some kind of cosmic progress. So it even feels like it has metaphysical implications. In fact, so spellbound or entranced were they in this progress myth that they felt this moral obligation, even a duty to colonize and industrialize. To kind of demonstrate it, Rudyard Kipling wrote a poem called The White Man's Burden, where he basically inspires other nations, other developed countries to go out and colonize and advance other cultures. So they didn't just justify domination and control and expansion of progress. They actually turned it into a moral duty. And in fairness, they also wanted to feed the poor and cure the sick. But the shadow of that lies in the fact that they were forcing their solutions on other cultures because they are the most advanced humans. And please, 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 please don't misunderstand what I'm trying to do with this video. I certainly don't want to sit here and judge our recent ancestors. I don't think that's a good way to spend our energy. We could never understand what it's like to live in another culture, so we shouldn't judge. And also, I don't want to imply that I'm connecting any current ideologies with these types of ideologies. I'm not doing any of that at all. All I'm trying to do is share with you what I found and show how easy it is to get swept away in a myth, in a story. And also try to show you that as uncomfortable as this is, it is a story we are still living today. Even though we have rejected the explicit forms of that thinking, to sustain our modern way of life, we are still exploiting underdeveloped countries, and we are still responsible for vast destruction of habitats and species extinctions. And this is not some eye roll at the latest political banter. This is real life. And we believe it's okay because progress, right? This is the best it's ever been. And here's where we can start to unravel things, because the story of progress is built on numbers: life expectancy, rates of violence, literacy levels, wealth, GDP. These numbers matter, but they don't tell the whole story of what it is to be human. They don't measure meaning, contentment, attention, connection to the living world, the feeling of being alive, depth of culture, and things like autonomy and freedom, and a feeling like you are playing a part in shaping society. When you include these types of considerations, the picture isn't quite as clear. And that, ironically, we're measuring progress through the same ideologies that brought about the progress myth. And the numbers now are being challenged. Anthropologists are revisiting the narrative that early humans lived short, brutal, unsophisticated lives. And they're finding that the evidence doesn't really support that progress myth narrative anymore. It's not quite clear that we are hands down better off than ever. For example, the idea that early humans all lived until they were 30 years old. This is a very common misconception, and these numbers are based on life expectancy at birth. But a more accurate picture comes about when we calculate life expectancy at 5 years old or 15 years old. We find that if they lived through childbirth and if they lived through these crucial years, that they would live well into the 7th decade of their lives. They also found that early humans seemed to have more time sovereignty. They had more control over the daily rhythms of their life, and they had more leisure time. They seem to have had stronger social bonds, whereas we seem to find higher and higher reporting of loneliness and social exclusion. They had rich, symbolic, and cultural lives, whereas we're finding higher reports of doom scrolling. They had freedom to try different ways of organizing their society, and we feel paralyzed by our mega system, and we feel like we lack the imagination to imagine anything different. And yeah, they lacked literacy, but they had a deep ecological and embodied wisdom. Okay, so maybe I could be accused of straw manning and steel manning a little bit here. So I'll leave it up to you to feel into any truth in what I'm saying. But what does seem to be true is that they are not necessarily living worse lives than us, just different and maybe even more human lives. And one last interesting thing is that earlier cultures knew they were in a myth. They had explicit mythical frameworks and rituals and shared cultural traditions that matched their mythic framework. Whereas modern culture believes we are outside a myth. We even believe we're outside of nature, but we are definitely in a myth of numbers and facts and production and progress. It's just that our myths are implicit. We are living our myth unconsciously. Now, I definitely didn't want to make this video to reject modern life or to diminish the legitimate progress of modern life. It actually started out as a pep talk and it kind of became a little bit of a downer. But we live in a really special time and we have real potential in our technology. If used correctly and with humility and reverence and within a good and wholesome story, Technology can make the use of Earth's resources so much more efficient and could curb our consumerism. So there is hope. So what this video was trying to do was help understand what Thomas Berry was saying in his gorgeously inspiring book, and to help us become more conscious about the story we are living forward. Because if we're not conscious of it, we'll never question it. And maybe after all this, the question isn't, have we progressed? The question is probably something more like, at what cost? And toward what? Are we trying to create a wonder world? Because it feels a little bit like a wasteland. These are questions that I think we each need to think about really hard and come up with our own personal answers to. And the most important question for me personally is that in our forward marching progress, what have we forgotten? Or what have we left behind?